Good morning, everyone, and welcome. We're really pleased to kick off International Women's Day with you and with this panel of inspiring women. They're going to talk about their path to success and some of the curves they've taken along the way, as we all do. We want to thank especially the Women's Foundation for co-sponsoring with us, and also JLL for providing this beautiful space. My name is Jennifer Wilson, and I'm the 2016 co-chair of the Women of Influence Committee at the AmCham. And one of our signature events every year is the Women of Influence Conference and Awards. And all of these women here are award winners. We have Karen Ann, in alphabetical order, 2015 Entrepreneur of the Year, Kimberly Cole, 2015 Professional of the Year, and we have Sumay Thompson, Nonprofit Leader of the Year from 2015. So before we get started, yes, I want to introduce Elaine Chung, who's our moderator for the panel today. Elaine is CFO for VF Corp, the supply office supporting a portfolio of brands you probably know, including the North Face, Timberland, Vans, Lee, and Wrangler. Elaine is passionate about connecting people to create opportunities for each other, especially creating opportunities for the underprivileged. She's currently a governor of the AmCham board, and is involved in the UN World Food Program, as well as the TWF Mentoring Program. At VF, she co-founded the Millennial Leadership Group, as well as the Women's Network. So, take it away, Elaine. And welcome, our fourth panelist, Julia Charlton, and she was our 2008 Professional of the Year Award winner.
Great. Thank you very much, everyone. Happy International Women's Day. I guess from today's the topic is, I want to start off with that we all heard the phrase, to err is human. So obviously today we want to explore with our panelists the role of risks and mistakes that have played in their career. Now, when I kind of reflect personally, I have a very positive outlook on making mistakes. From a personal perspective, I was a high school dropout. I did all the wonderful things that a rebellious teenager that will simply make parents cringe. But guess what? I look at that as a life lesson learned. I learned from my experience. I don't look back, but I just make sure that I don't make the same mistake twice. But then again, I kind of look at, well, this isn't like some planned, orchestrated way of making it. It's just stupid, teenage ignorance. Then when I kind of look at my personal career and thinking about what have I done that is risky? And actually, it's more risk adverse because I went from an interior design major to become an accountant as majoring accounting and finance. Typical Chinese career, you got to, have something as substantive. So unlike my first two panelists, Karen and Sumay, who actually have taken what I see as very, very risky steps in their career. Karen went from an investment banking world dominated by male to co-founding a school, International Montessori School, and have led it to become one of the leading Montessori bilingual programs. Sumay has started her career in law, moved on to very senior corporate roles at Disney, Financial Times, and Christie's, and now into the NGO world. And no doubt, we all know that Sumay has just really taken the Women's Foundation into the next level with significant influence into the community, in corporates, as well as government policies. So with that initial brief introduction, and please feel free to introduce a little bit, elaborate your background a bit more, I would like to ask each of you to kind of look at an important inflection point in your career where you have taken a risk and not sure really how it's going to play out, and how did you learn from that? So I would like to start off with Karen first, and then to Sumay.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Elaine. Thank you. First, I want to say I'm so pleased to be here. It's an honor to be amongst all these amazing women. It's actually a little intimidating, but we'll try our best. But thank you, Elaine, for that introduction. I think for me, I'm very lucky. I found my passion, which is to run the school. And even though I really enjoyed all my previous work life, this was really what really ticked for me. And I think that looking back, I think what's probably more interesting for the topic of today is the process that it took to get me, and I'll try and outline that a little bit to show how you take those risks, and each of us has a different appetite and what motivates you to do it. So I decided to jump from the trading floor to this because I saw how children were learning, and I felt that it was even more traditional than in my day, and I went to a very traditional school. I think another thing that really helped me, so I had this desire, but I also had an aunt who had also started a school, so I had this role model that I could see, wow, it's doable, she was successful, maybe I can do that. So I went down this path. I was doing trading floor during the day, studying education at night, researching how to find a place, how much it's going to cost building the models. And I did this process for 3 years. I stayed working in banking and researching this for 3 years, not able to take that plunge. So even though I really wanted to do it, I didn't have, I still, needed to be in my safety zone. So for me, what really made the difference was that I met someone that I could then take this plunge with. I met my partner, Ann Sawyer. And unlike me, she was a huge risk taker. She basically signed a lease for our first site before she hired anybody. And I met this woman, I thought, she's crazy. But I really like her. And within a month of working together, I quit my job and we started the school. So, I mean, looking back, it's really amazing. I am not a risk taker by nature, but my path led me to someone who could carry that risk with me, and that made me comfortable. And I believe that the success, or where we are today, we can always do better, is very much a function of us having met each other and done that and run the school together. So I don't know if I answered your question, but that for me was the most rewarding risk I've ever taken in my life, and I'm very thankful of where we are today.
I think this partnership is really this community also why we celebrate International Women's Day, because we are each other's partners in this journey of risk. Sumay?
Such a beautiful story. So as Elaine says, I did have a long career in corporate life. I was a corporate slave for over 25 years, started off life as a corporate finance lawyer, Linklaters, moved in-house of Disney as a lawyer in their TV division, worked for a .com, actually was general counsel and IPO'd this .com on NASDAQ in the first bubble. That's how old I am. And then went on to run the Financial Times. Diana, where are you? Remember hiring Diana? And then my last corporate job was co-head of Christie's in Asia. And then in 2008, when my second daughter showed up, I decided, okay, I felt I wasn't very connected to my kids, who can identify with that. And I decided to take a year off. And that's what really led me to the Women's Foundation. I mean, one was spending time with my girls and realizing that the education system, the culture, pop culture, the entertainment, the content that they were watching was so riddled with gender stereotypes. And then on a more personal note, I never thought I would be the kind of woman who would lose a lot of confidence, but I really did. And it's very unnerving to step off that corporate ladder when you've been a senior executive and you don't have a business card and people really treat you so differently. And I just thought, gosh, and I was anyway, organizations were very kind and were asking me to join boards and things, and the Women's Foundation was one of them. And they said, we'd really like you to help us find a CEO. So I hired myself, basically. I said, I'm going to do this because I think we need to have, more conversations and more initiatives to address the barriers that are preventing women from achieving their full potential. So a lot of people who knew me as this kind of hard-charging corporate executive, were quite surprised when I switched to the NGO world, and I think a lot of people are surprised that I've lasted as long as I have. It's now been 7 years. But it did feel like a leap into the dark. And I didn't have the 3-year gestation period that you had. I actually decided very quickly I was going to do it once I decided I was going to do it. But there are much fewer differences and many more similarities, actually, between the NGO world and the corporate sector. It really depends how you want to conduct yourself and what kind of organization you want to run. Not that I want to turn anyone away from their corporate jobs, but it is very fulfilling to work in the NGO world. I mean, okay, you have to accept a pay cut, but there are so many other compensations. And actually, the skills that you can bring from the corporate world are very laterally applicable. You need really good marketing and PR skills because there's such fierce donor competition for dollars. Competition for donor dollars, editing. You need really good partnership building and negotiation skills, and you need very good governance, so legal, finance, compliance, all really laterally applicable. The only other thing I'd like to mention is that, one thing that helped me to deal with kind of something that was new and scary was the fact that I am really, really afflicted with something called imposter syndrome, which I think some women have, but I have it in spades. And what it means is that I am constantly terrified that the penny will drop and people will find out that I actually don't know anything about what I'm supposed to know about. It's like that dream when you have, you're sitting at an exam that you didn't prepare for. Well, my life is like that dream. So I have, speaking notes for every single occasion that I have to speak for. I over-prepare for everything. But, when you're about to embark on something kind of new and you embark on something new, it's actually not bad to have that kind of tick to make you kind of over diligent. So I was trying to compensate for the fact that I never worked in an NGO. I was trying to compensate for the fact that I was completely new really to the women's issues arena. So I did a lot of reading and worked really hard, and I think that's propelled TWF to where it is today. Thank you.
Well, I'm glad to know that the corporate skills is really the anchor of how Women's Foundation has really propelled to next level under your leadership. So I have hope. And I'm just shocked to see that you're saying you have this lack of confidence and you over-prepare, because I just think you're amazing. Now, switching over to Julia, I hope that she doesn't tell me that she has imposter syndrome, because I read her CV and we've all known Julia in the community for a long time. And when I look through her background, it's like this is a list of risk and rewards, successes and achievements. And I think you're probably one of the first people to move to China became China was a fancy, and being a fluent Mandarin speaker. So tell us about your background and the risk that you've taken that I think is outlined throughout your career.
Thank you, Elaine. Well, first of all, I never feel like I'm a success. I find every day a struggle. And I think there's an expression, that the only easy day is yesterday. I mean, every day is a struggle, and I'm always trying. And I did suffer terribly from imposter syndrome when I was younger, not so much now, because I see so many men around me who I really don't think are better than me. So I run a law firm, and in my job as a lawyer, I have to say I can't afford the luxury of mistakes. So if we're talking about mistakes, I have to provide clients with advice, and it would be very costly if I get it wrong. Having said that, if you do make a mistake, I think the major aspect to it is how you react to it, because many, many mistakes, assuming they're not fatal, can actually be sorted out. So it's not losing confidence, it's dealing with it, it's addressing it. And I try to create that environment in my firm. I try to say to everybody, just tell me what's wrong, we can sort it out, no matter how bad it is, let's deal with it. So touch wood, up to now, that seems to have been a strategy that's worked, because I think the worst things is actually burying mistakes. I'm inclined to agree with Woody Allen when he joked that if a doctor makes a mistake, it's better to bury the subject. But unfortunately, for most of us, we can't. So I think my point is that there's a need to recognize that some mistakes are far more avoidable than others, and that as a professional, it's absolutely crucial that we get the basic learning out of the way in time to start dealing with the demands of risk management needed to function successfully. It's possible professionally to be wrong but not negligent, and that's not a mistake. So being wrong is not always a mistake. It's inevitable for everybody. And if anyone says they've never made a mistake, frankly, they're not telling the truth. So everyone makes mistakes. And I've made an awful lot of mistakes through my life. So just turning to some of a couple of the things that Elaine mentioned. Well, first of all, I had children at a very young age. I was 24 when I had my first child. I was the first woman ever to go back to work after having a baby in my law firm. And fairly early on, I had the nanny brought my eldest son, who's now 31, to the firm. And in the canteen, in a very discreet corner, I breastfed him because he was crying. Now then, I had the wrath of the HR department on me that afternoon. Apparently they'd had so many complaints about how terrible this was, and I felt that it was an awful mistake. And I carried on, and I had 3 more children after that. I came to Hong Kong in 1987, and I had 2 more here. I found Hong Kong a much more conducive place, not for breastfeeding, but for, but certainly for the domestic help I was able to have, and being able to integrate having children, and the wonderful ladies who've helped me to bring up my children, frankly, has been a great support to me. And also the proximity of the pediatrician, the school, etc., to my place of work. That made it an awful lot easier. So was that a mistake? I don't think so. It took my career on a very different trajectory. At the time, it seemed like a big mistake. But looking back now, I don't think so. I'm very happy I had children at a relatively young age. And the other point which Elaine mentioned was my enthusiasm for China. So very early on, I thought it's an absolute no-brainer. If you look at history, the Chinese economy has always been extremely prominent. And it was very obvious to me that the Chinese economy was growing. So when I was very enthusiastic about China in the 90s, in a city law firm, I was regarded as really an outlier. I was regarded as a Sinophile, and that wasn't really a compliment at the time. And I remember I sent an enthusiastic fax to a partner of my firm at the time who was sometimes in London, sometimes in Hong Kong, and said, oh, could he send me information because there's a Chinese company interested in listing on the London Stock Exchange. And I received a fax, I still have, saying, Julia, this is pie in the sky, and I'm not responding. Now, this very same partner, just a few weeks ago, sent me an email saying he was retiring and that how well I'd done, and he remembered those days when he was working with me and my colleagues in Hong Kong as the best days of his working life. So things that can look like a mistake at the time may not be. You need to trust your instincts, I think. And then the other thing I really wanted to mention to everybody is that work is just part of life. And the biggest mistakes you could make are not to find the angelic moments in every day, the times when it's lovely to get up in the morning and see the wonderful sky in Hong Kong, the times you might spend with your family, your friends, or your children if you have children. These are the most important things, I think, and it's really important not to overlook them. And I just wanted to mention to you, because I love this quote. It's from Tolstoy, and let me just find it. It's from Pierre towards the end of War and Peace, and he says that they say sufferings are misfortunes, but if at once this minute I was asked, would I remain what I was before I was taken prisoner, or go through all that again, I should say, for God's sake, let me. We imagine that as soon as we are torn out of our habitual path, all is over, but it's only the beginning of something new and good. As long as there's life, there's happiness. There is a great deal before us. And that's how I try to approach life.
Wow, thank you. Thank you, Julia. I think it was a really good reminder. Sometimes we just need to stop and smell the roses, because perhaps the mistake that we will make in life is we forget to do that, to forget to enjoy, whether it's your life, your work, and like you said, those two things together. Now, moving to Kimberly. Now, Kimberly has had a long 25-year career with the same firm, which is very rare nowadays for the younger generation. But you have moved across geographies, across multiple roles, launched new products and service offerings. And became one of the most senior female executives at Thomson Reuters. Now, I'm just really excited to hear how you survived within a very male-dominant role as well, and to become one of the most senior female leaders.
Yes, so I guess I've been at Thomson Reuters for 25 years, which I have to tell everyone I started when I was 4, and keep getting younger. And so for some people that might seem like not particularly risk-taking, and I guess I didn't ever believe that I would necessarily stay at the one firm for such a long time. But as Elaine said, I've managed to move. I think I tried to count it, how many cross-border moves, and I think, we're up to 8. And most of those with the family. So I guess the biggest, or the first, if we talk about, what was sort of the first risk, or the first time that I really did something that, potentially could have gone wrong, was probably my move to Singapore in 1994. Now, obviously, since then, I've moved many, many times, so obviously it turned out to be a good thing. But I really hadn't done that much travel. As a family, we hadn't travelled. My mum was a single mum until I was 11. And even the first time she went overseas, she was over 40. And, it wasn't like overseas holidays from Australia were a part of my, upbringing at all. So I guess that is why Reuters at the time appealed, that they were a big global firm. So once I saw how many people travelled, and especially because I guess of the editorial, background, people went on assignment a lot, which was part of our culture of being independent and unbiased, was to move people around a lot. And so I kind of focused on how I could get an overseas posting. But then when I did get this posting to Singapore, number one, I left sales and I moved into what was an Asia-wide sales training role. And so I hadn't really done that before. And I had to write training courses and launch different products across the region, etc. So to Sue May's point of, at times thinking, gosh, they might find out that I really have no idea how to do this. But I'm kind of with Julia that then I would see a lot of, incompetent men, so I'd probably be okay. And there's a great video, and I can't remember who it is now, and I always tell my children, I have 2 daughters, I should have mentioned, who are 15 and 17. And that whole, when you're not feeling particularly confident, even apparently blind people run it, if they were to win something, they do this, both hands in the air. So before you're going to do something, whether it's, you're going for an interview or something, they say, you just, go into the toilet and then go. And that, if you do that, you just automatically feel more confident. So I often do that. If I didn't actually do it this morning, so I was kind of thinking this was a friendly audience. But the first move to Singapore was probably, one of the things that really was quite defining. And obviously I've just gone on to move a lot since then. But I guess it was successful as much as it was kind of scary and challenging at the time. And I guess personally and professionally, so I left my then, boyfriend in Australia, who's now husband, father of my 2 children, and I kind of thought it would all be okay, but I don't think he necessarily did. And then I've sort of managed to move many times, lived in London twice, worked from London into the States, lived in Hong Kong twice, and I did go back to Australia in between. But yeah, that was probably a very defining moment.
Can I add something? I was on another panel a couple of days ago, and one of my co-panelists said something I thought was really valuable, which was when you are with an organization for a long time, you work on building those relationships. People trust you. You have their respect, and that actually allows you to take risks. Yeah. And it gives you the support to take those risks and also balance your family life. And I thought that was, really insightful. So I thought I'd add that.
Yeah, I think you've kind of, built up a lot of credit. I mean, I think the other thing about some of the, I guess, where people think of things as risk, it's mainly, maybe it's a different framing of what you're looking at. So I always think about what I really like is problem solving. But some people would see maybe they're thrown into a situation where there is a lot of uncertainty and, it's not properly defined and we're not exactly sure exactly what we're trying to, get or how quickly or whatever. Whereas I kind of like those situations as well. And I don't know whether that's just something because of all the moves and because of the different changes in roles that I think about that way. But it's the same as every time, and we've had a lot of restructures, but I think most firms have, but continually people seem to internally at Thomson Reuters think we restructure more than anyone else. So I always look at that as an opportunity as well rather than a threat. So anytime there's a restructure, I always think, oh, this is great. There might be new opportunities and this might reform and create different things where I could do something new and different, whereas a lot of people find it quite threatening that they won't have a role or they won't stay where they are, which they quite enjoy.
Yeah, I was just going to comment. I don't think you should downplay risk-taking when you stay in an organisation. I just think that's a huge achievement. I always think that having my own firm in some ways is much easier because I can't sack myself. Right? So I couldn't have done what you've done. I think it's amazing.
Well, given I'm in finance, I actually we have to be perfect with our accuracy of information. And what I've tried to teach the younger generations, how do we better deal with ambiguity when things are not very well defined? Because it's the ability to work with that. Being uncomfortable is where you're actually taking risk. So with that, kind of leading into the next area that I want to explore with you is we often, as women, tend to see a mistake as being something that, oh, darn, I blame myself for it. And, there are quotes that we recently heard that is, people don't fear failure, they fear being blamed. And, I would like for you to share with us where, in a situation where you have failed, and actually, how do you get bounced back from this misstep, and how do you stop blaming yourself? Now, International Women's Day is, where a lot of us speakers are in high demand, and Sue-May being one of them. And unfortunately, Sue-May has to leave a little bit earlier, so I'm going to see if we can start with Sue-May first.
Sure. And actually, I'm going off to go and do an interview on CNBC, and I hate TV because you can't have notes. So, Kimberly, I'm going to be doing this, the whole time. Okay. So, well, one of the key mistakes that I made was when I was co-head of Christie's, and I was just totally naive about what Sheryl Sandberg says, that success and likability are positively correlated for men, but negatively correlated for women, which basically means that when you're a successful man, both genders like you a lot, and when you're a successful woman, both genders don't tend to like you as much. And I just want to see, as a show of hands, do people agree with that statement? Kind of, if you agree with that? Okay. Well, the thesis is borne out by quite a lot of research. People have done experiments where you have an MBA class that gets an identical case study, but in one the CEO is named John, and people think he's great and effective, and in the other one it's exactly the same circumstances, but the CEO is named Jane, and people think she's selfish and they don't want to work for her. So those stereotypes are really strong. But what it comes down to, I think, is that hard-charging women and violate unwritten rules still about acceptable social conduct. And almost every single senior woman I know has attracted comments at some point in their lives that they're too aggressive, they're not a team player, they've got sharp elbows, whatever. And it's tough. And okay, if I look at my own case, I was always called bossy when I was little, and it is true that I used to organize competitions I could win and shows that I could direct and clubs that I could run. But anyway, it was an okay label, right, at that point. But later on in my career, and really at this instance at Christie's, I learned that actually women have to work doubly hard to be successful and nice. So I had just joined Christie's, and I've been brought in as a change agent in Asia. And in my zeal to kind of do a good job and impress the new bosses and everything else, I had all the Gantt charts and the PowerPoint presentations, and I was running 13 offices in the region and had 200 something staff, and they would get kind of requests for kind of hand in your where you've got to in your progress reports and things from me constantly. And one day I got a call from the global head of HR, Liz Dunlap, who was based in New York, and she said, "I'm flying over to Hong Kong to come and have lunch with you." And I thought, am I either going to be fired or I'm going to get a promotion? I don't know. I mean, no one flies half around the world to come and have lunch with you, right? So she said to me, "Look, Sumay, the leadership appreciates that you're trying your best, but I've had a bit of negative feedback from your team. They're feeling railroaded. They don't feel that you have taken the time and trouble to connect with them, to get them on side. This is a problem because you can't lead if nobody wants to follow." So I said, okay. I wasn't quite crying into my salad, but it was a bit of a downer, I can tell you. So I said, okay, Liz, look, I would really appreciate some advice. What do I do now? And she said, well, you could go and buy some note cards and start sending people personal notes. And it's even better if they're not about work. And I was like, God, will she ever have this conversation with a guy? Can you imagine? But anyway, and she said, look, just write to people, thank them more. And, I don't know about you guys, but I think I thank people all the time, actually, just for doing their job. But it was, again, brought home to me that, how you perceive yourself is not how other people perceive you. And actually how other people think of you is more important if you want to be effective. So I went and got these darn note cards, and I started sending them, and it was incredible, actually, the palpable effect that it had on morale and my relationships with my team. People wrote back and said, "Thank you so much for your cards." So then I had to go and buy more note cards, and it just went on and on. But anyway, it was very good, and I really learned that an all business approach is not always good for business. And particularly if you are a woman and a senior woman, people are looking for signs that you are nice, that you are a nurturer. That really brought it home to me. And so the postscript to this episode is that, a couple of years later, I read in HBR that the CEO of Campbell Soup sent 30,000 handwritten notes to his people while he was in the job. And even better, it gets even better, Indra Nooyi, the CEO of PepsiCo, writes notes not to her direct reports, but to their parents to tell them what great people they are, so that the parents can take pride in their kids' work and they feel part of the experience and they feel good about the upbringing that they gave to their kids. So, there you are. That's my story.
That is a very powerful story. For a moment there, I just thought, yes, I spent Christmas writing 65 thank you cards to each of every one of my of my team until I hear the 30,000 one. So I have a long way to go. But I think this is where you kind of look at this balance of, being female, and that niceness actually can be played to the positive aspect of that working relationship. So, Kimberly, how about in your male-dominant world, and what have you learned within how did you get back up on a horse from one of your mistakes?
I think that's a fascinating story, and I do write sort of handwritten thank yous, but not actually internally, more externally, because I think that it is powerful now. Everything's via email. One other thing I'd say is I think the sharing of mistakes is probably something that doesn't happen, and I think now with sort of social media and the Facebook kind of everything's perfect and, you know, we're only going to tell you the good stuff, people don't think other people have been through things. So, like, even you saying, you know, you failed at school and stuff. So I failed first year university. So I think that's probably an interesting one was, you know, I'd came out of school and I'd been a very good student and I'd never failed anything. So I actually didn't think it was probably possible. And then I got to first year university and I got my first car, and then I got this, you know, waitressing job so that I could afford to buy petrol for said car. And that job I worked, you know, I did 2 or 3 nights a week, and I was working till 2 and 3 in the morning. And then I still actually turned up to university, but obviously I was a bit tired. And but actually having good attendance marks was also not particularly good, because I think then they just thought I was stupid. Because I actually went to the lectures and I went to the tutorials, but then I remember walking into those exams. I didn't fail everything, but I failed most of them. And reading those exam papers and thinking, nope, I have no idea what this is about. And that was just absolutely terrifying. So how did I bounce back? Well, firstly, of course, I was absolutely terrified to tell my mother that this had happened. So that was the first thing that I had to do. But I think I initially just went out for a run, which I'd still say is probably a coping mechanism, do a bit of exercise. Always sort of changes the mindset a bit. But I realised that I actually did have to work, and I actually did have to put in effort and apply myself. And that, you know, after that, I didn't fail anything again. And I kind of realised that it was about the effort I put in, and it was about focusing on what I was trying to achieve and making sure that, I guess, I prioritised things correctly. And to Sume's point, you know, there's just never enough hours in the day. So, I mean, I do feel we get some unreasonable demands that, you know, you have to be fantastic and you have to be, you know, super nice, and, you know, you need to, I mean, here it's okay, you have to have a perfectly clean house. Well, I do, because I have help. And then, you know, you have to be brilliant at work. Whereas I think sometimes, certainly I found in Australia, you just had to have a different, you know, balance. I mean, sorry, yeah, the house is going to be messy because I don't have time to do it, and there might be 3 loads of washing, and you have to wear the shirt that's, you know, old and not the one that you really like, but, you know, that's life. Whereas here, I'm with Julia, my God, it's just so much easier with, you know, being able to sort of have that right balance and have help.
Well, really following on from Kimberly's point about exercise, I think one of the biggest mistakes I've made is not really to do with all the many, many mistakes in my career, but more to do with the fact that during the time I was bringing up my children, traveling a lot, I was chair of an international legal network for 2 years, flying a lot for that, obviously dealing with my clients, etc. Although I sort of paid lip service to exercising and looking after myself, I really didn't. I'd buy tons of vitamins, and then I'd throw them away because they'd expired. You know, I don't know how I thought they were going to get into my system through osmosis. I sort of went, fortunately I did keep up hiking. I have a place in the Cyclone Country Park, and I go there some weekends, and I did carry on hiking a little bit, and I would join a gym, and then I'd go a few times, and then I'd be too busy, and I didn't go. Net result, I broke my foot, and I ended up totally unconnected, of course, but because of my lack of physique, I was in a huge amount of pain for a very long time. And I just realized that I had let myself absolutely deteriorate. My muscle mass was awful. And if you, as you get older, you don't keep exercising. I mean, Kimberly goes running. She's a much better example than I am. I had to claw my way back, and it took hours and hours a day of doing yoga, doing weights. I'm still doing it. And I realized I need to set aside that time every day for myself. And I was absolutely forced to by the physical state I was in. Now, I think my body was just telling me, you have to do this. But I think that was really one of the biggest mistakes I've ever made, was not looking after myself and not carrying on exercising. Because if we're all going to carry on working longer, I mean, I think I probably will, certainly into my 60s. I think it's becoming more the norm. You have to be fit, you have to be on your game, and even if you're not working, you need to feel good. So looking after yourself is extremely important. And, you know, I was so interested in what Sue May said. I write a lot of handwritten notes, but I'm going to write a lot more now I've heard that story. A friend of mine in London was in a very, very senior role, and she was getting on not at all with any of her colleagues. She'd just been appointed, and her organization was wonderful. They appointed a life coach to help her. And the life coach said, well, look, I'm going to put all rules aside because actually your organization has shown me your feedback forms, and look at this one. And there was one from a man who worked for her who gave her 0 on every single count. Now, how can that be true? You can't have 0 on everything. So she realized what a hostile environment she was in. And I don't know, nobody told her to write notes. Maybe I'll pass that on to her. But I think that sometimes you just have to recognize that that is an environment you're in, and you need to nurture yourself. You need to get the mentoring, the life coaching. Look after yourself as you get more senior, physically and mentally and spiritually. So that is a big mistake if you don't, I think.
Wow. I mean, definitely sometimes we often look at how we contribute to work, that we forget about ourselves. Now, speaking about work in like in an environment where you have to, I guess, please everyone, I don't envy being a co-founder of a school, because when it comes to parents and children, you can never please everyone. So, Karen, you know, within that context, do you have how are there any specific circumstances within the school environment? I'm not limiting you to that you know really helps challenge you in how you deal with the mistakes and get back in energy and looking after yourself.
Sure, thank you. Yes, actually being here today really brings back a memory, because our first campus was just down the street, and we started it when this building was being built. So thinking about failure, right? And I was thinking, well, there are many different definitions of failure. Sometimes it's just, I could have done that a different way would be failure. So, and you know, what you learn from it. And I think one nice way is stories. So I'd like to tell the little story about my little first campus down the road here. And, you know, we leased it, and as often in Hong Kong, property is very challenging. And, you know, 5 years into our lease, basically, our rent got doubled because this area was becoming so fancy, and Polyform, which is a furniture store, wanted our space. So anyway, the situation was that we had to move. Being the founders of the school, the people that carried that community, carried all the decisions, we basically dealt with this ourselves, thinking that we would be able to negotiate this. The result of that was in May, we would come out and announce to our community that in September, we would be somewhere else. So what we thought we would be successful in, we were not, and we had to move. Now, we had a very difficult situation where we had all our parents in a room like this, and we had basically parents walk out of the room, parents saying, you have no idea how to negotiate a lease, why didn't you engage me? We had parents saying, when are we going to find someone else to run this school? And so, thankfully we were very lucky, we were able to find another place. But what I learned from that is sometimes you don't have to take it all. And secondly, when you manage a stakeholder community, which is a very complex thing, and I think especially in NGOs as well, you see this a lot, you really need to bring them on board and have their contribution. So the one side of this is I learned that I should engage my community in the right way. And the second time this happened to us, where we were told we had to leave somewhere, the first thing I did was I called a parent who was actually in PR, and I said, I need some help in PR. I have no idea what to do. What should I do? And as a result of this, I've learned so much about how better to manage a situation like this, how to bring people who care about this so much, the right people to come and work together with you so that you share that decision, you benefit from their expertise, and you have buy-in from your community. Now, so that's, you know, one of the really learning paths I've walked on, so and to understand how you can use your community. The other side of that is I've also learned that, as Elaine said, you can't please everybody all the time. And I think dealing with failure is understanding that, you know, what it is that you believe in and you think is the right thing. So I think that that's something that as management of a school, everybody cares a great deal, and there's a lot of personal values and personal preferences to what is right and wrong. I want my child to only eat a certain kind of snack, and I have to be careful because I have parents amongst the audience today. I believe that my child should have that much time outdoors every day, and it's all about balance. And there will always be someone who is unhappy with your decision, and you just have to have the confidence to know that, you know, you are taking care of everybody in the best, most balanced way that you can. So that is something that allows me to sleep every night, I guess.
Well, having the confidence to know that it's okay to take the decision and stand behind it. And with that, we got to give Sume a woo! Thank you, Sume. Good luck on your interview. Well, you know, we kind of hear through with our panelists, you know, this commitment. It's standing behind it, learning from your mistakes. We often think, especially like we kind of talked about nowadays in this millennial generation, people don't have 25-year careers anymore. But yet we said, you know, sometimes being in a 25-year career within the same company has its own set of challenges. But how, Kimberly, specifically, how do you think, what advice will you give to the younger generation of how they need to, I guess, have the tenacity to stay within company, or perhaps how an organization can help support the younger generation?
Yeah, so I think it's a good point, and we've actually, within Asia, developed what we're calling our emerging, that's not right, leading in growth markets training program, which we've specifically done not just for the millennials, but we identify, you know, key talent, both millennial and throughout the organisation, and we've tailored something here for Asia. So we think a lot of the courses that we were putting people on, management training, etc., were coming out of Europe or the US. Certainly Europe's not in a growth phase, so we wanted to have something that was specifically designed for growth markets and to really develop a growth mindset, which several people may have sort of read that there's been a fair amount of research on a growth mindset. So back to my comments before about, you know, failing and they maybe thought I was stupid, was a lot of it is educational perspectives, as well as that, you know, you don't say to your children, gosh, aren't you clever? It's more about the process, and it's more about the effort and how they got to a certain result, rather than just intrinsically what you think their sort of talents are. So internally we have a program as well that is focused on, I guess, developing that growth mindset, and that can be understanding, you know, how do you make them more resilient? How do you get them to sort of problem solve in situations of uncertainty? It's to remove things that considered sort of a fixed mindset rather than a growth mindset. And a lot of that is around continual learning. And I remember hearing Clive Woodward speak about the English rugby team, and he said, how do you create champions is that, everyone on that team has an immense amount of talent, but so do the Wallabies and the All Blacks and all of the other rugby teams. So everyone's got that. No one is at that level without an amount of talent. So then the next level up of the people in that team is teachability and their, continuing desire to learn and to develop new skills and new approaches and, run new plays, etc. The ones who then go above and beyond and become what he called his warriors were even then taking the next level. So they would be, using data, all of the information that they were given on themselves individually to then really think about what else they could do. And you're not going to have, a team that is all full of warriors, but you want to make sure at least everyone is teachable. So I thought that was really useful. So I guess that's kind of what we're building in terms of how we set people up to approach things differently. The other elements I was just looking at the other elements that we build in is, some of it is the ability to rate themselves more accurately. So you'll often get, millennials just think they're great at everything and ready for the next role when they've been there for 2 minutes. So that's one of them. That you should welcome feedback and take feedback from a lot of different people, and that's how you learn. And then the one that I mentioned, see effort as what makes you smart, not just innate ability. Find your way around setbacks. So how do they handle the setbacks? How do they do that? Choose to challenge yourself to confront difficulties. And then what we need to encourage as an organisation is to praise on the efforts of how you got there, or if you hit a roadblock and you chose to, pursue a different path or do something else or bring in a different tactic, that we praise that. So, people say celebrate failure, which I don't think anyone in most organisations can really do. So you need to be praising the process of how did you, if something didn't work, what are you doing to then, come up with a new path?
Well, my firm is quite small, so we don't have these amazing programs, but I think for young people who work with me, we have to deliver a very good work product, so that's important. But I think my real advice to anybody, and what I try to show by example, is that ethics are first, middle, and last in everything. And I think if anybody of any age sticks to their ethics, even if they lose their job or whatever happens, then they have not lost themselves. And I think that is absolutely the most important thing. And for me, I actually learn, I think, probably more from the millennials than they learn from me. I mean, they can see what I'm doing, I can check their work, etc. But I just learn so much from them. And I think in this modern world, we have to constantly reinvent ourselves. And their approach to communication, how they do things so quickly, the shortcuts they use, the way they think. I need to really keep abreast of that, and it's my privilege in a way to work with young people to have that opportunity that they even share it with me, because I think if we start to lose that as we get older, then we're going to become obsolete in the workforce and in the workplace and in being able to develop businesses. So I think that's extremely important, certainly in what I do in law and in the corporate world. Yeah.
So Julia, one thing that I want to touch upon is you actually, your boutique firm has been award-winning regarding flexible work arrangements, despite a very, very demanding profession. So within that, how do you encourage people to strike that balance and being able to kind of like take choices that one might seem as risky to their career because they are spending more time and investing in themselves? Like, how do you advise people that it's okay to do that?
I don't think I kind of advise them. It usually just evolves from situations, and some are men and some are women. I've had men who work long distance. They've decided to relocate with their families. Someone who works for me, for example, has taken his daughter to Canada to put her in school, and he's working long distance from there at the moment. It's working fine. I had another colleague who worked for many years from Dublin after he's made a family decision to relocate there. And I think with good communication, it can really, really work. I also have a number of women in my Hong Kong office who work part-time, and they're very flexible. Sometimes they're working at home, sometimes in the office, and that's mainly for family reasons that they do that, and it suits them extremely well. Now, obviously it's not possible for that type of part-time working to focus on very demanding client work, but not all work is very demanding client work. There's a lot of extremely valuable skills that some women in my firm bring to us, and being there as a reflective sounding board of people who've got years of experience in law, it would be a great loss to the profession if they actually weren't there. And they also perform a mentoring role. They've got the time to look at things and to reflect, which is extremely useful for the firm where fee earners are running around so much. So I think it really depends on the person, and because my firm is relatively small, we're able to determine that. I have to say it doesn't always work. I mean, you do get one or two people who will take advantage of this for extended periods of time and then say, oh, goodbye, I was actually just saving money so that I could retire completely. And, you know, so it's not all a sort of universal success story here, but you would expect that, I suppose, with all employees. Yeah.
Maybe I can add as well. So I'm in a profession where it's really hard to do flexible working hours because teachers have to be with the children, present from 8 to 3 or whatever the hours are. So, you know, being flexible and stuff like that, we take a different slant to it. So we have actually quite a number of people who have been teachers and then decided that their family is more important, and we try and figure out, well, what role can they play in the school? Can they come out? Can they do a coordination role? Can they help all the different teachers on the different campuses understand certain things better? And that we found very valuable, because these are people who understand how our school works, our values, and they can actually, in their flexible time, run around and share that with the rest of the team. So, you know, whilst one might think, well, it's not possible, you don't want to teach you don't want to have those hours anymore, you're a teacher, you can't do this. Actually being creative and thinking about what each person can bring to the organization has really benefited us.
Now, within that, Karen, speaking about this education environment, I mean, I always say that, you know, all our kids gets a medal just for showing up for soccer, you know, not even winning the soccer game. So, you know, we insulate our children to not have failed, you know? And so what role do you think education and how it transcends into organization that actually prepares us for failure?
Thank you. That's obviously very true to my heart. We have this term helicopter parenting right now, right? Many parents really want to protect their children from everything, from messing up, from you know, making them mistakes. And really, you know, when they're growing up is the safest place for them to understand that trying something, repeating it, getting the answer themselves, making the mistakes to help them learn and see that mistake as part of that learning process is really the most important. Because if we don't do that when they grow up as adults, they're going to be the people who, you know, are afraid of the mistakes. They ignore them, they blame other people, you know, they pretend it didn't happen. And, you know, that is, as Julie, you said, it's how you fix the mistake after, which is the most important thing. So, you know, I think that, you know, we really try to create this culture, if I may use an example of at least how we do it in the Montessori system. So we're very lucky we benefited from a wonderful woman, Maria Montessori, since it's International Women's Day. She was a genius. She really understood that children have the innate desire to learn, and you just need to provide the environment for them to experience it, and that the learning happens very naturally. So just to take a simple example, we have these exercises where children pour water. And, you know, they have to pour from one pitcher to the other. It's to help them do motor control, concentration, everything. But when they spill the water, you just allow it to happen. They just scoop it up themselves. They take care of it. You allow them to go through that thought process. You give them the time to do that. There's a famous Montessori video where a child is building something, and he keeps messing up at the end. He keeps dropping it, and the time that child is allowed to complete it, you cannot believe it, and nobody interferes. And it's that really that brings them around. So the brain is like a muscle, right? We do exercise, we train our muscles. We have to allow the brain to train under these mistake situations so that it gets used to, and it builds the right networks to get you through that. So, our philosophy is that the whole classroom is a mistake-making, self-building environment. And if you allow it to happen, the children will get there. And we work a lot with parents to do that. So thank you. You gave me a chance to share my little passion here. I wanted to also add, back to the point, I once attended a talk by a former CEO of Mattel, a gentleman called Tom Kalinske, and he talked about how he changed the way Barbie was marketed. It was really interesting, but one of the things that really stuck with me was in his company, he started something, and obviously it's an area of innovation where you want people to be thinking of new ideas and new ways of doing things. So every time someone who had a good idea, worked hard to make it happen and failed, there was a monthly prize for that. And I thought that really stuck with me, and I thought that was amazing. And, I'm still thinking about how to do that in my organization.
So celebrate the process of recognizing failure to learning from that. Exactly. I think I need to give myself an award because, remember, I never look at it as a mistake. I just don't make it twice. With that, thank you. I would like to open up the floor for the last 10 minutes to questions from the audience.
Thank you. My name's Shirley. I have to say, Julia, she was the lawyer at my first IPO. You just had your fourth child. Talking about physical fitness, I still remember the time you took me to the Aberdeen Marina Club. You were doing sit-ups while we're talking about deals, and you were practicing your Mandarin on me. And I'm playing with your toddler. You were like multitasking 4 ways. It was amazing.
Shirley, I can also remember spending a whole night with you in the office drafting something. Yeah,
right.
I think we started at 9 p.m. Right?
Right. It's amazing to also Karen and I were colleagues at Bankers Trust just in that building. It's such a privilege and honor to sort of literally grow up with you ladies 20 years ago. I want to say is that for women leaders, sometimes we're so different. Our DNAs are different. We were taught from very early on is what the world will think of your next step, your consequences, your mistakes. So for me, I find myself so much risk averse in a sense. I keep having this noise in my back. Don't be reckless. Yes, you're bold, but don't be reckless because there is a consequences. And I have a situation here now. I also, like Julia, I'm trying to be innovative as a leader in my company. I hire a lot of millennials because I feel I'm learning so much from them. And there is a bridge between their knowledge and my experience. But I find myself, do I really want to build a workforce? I currently run an organization for a mainland Chinese billionaire. I buy a lot of companies for him. And I want to create a culture where everyone has to trust each other. Communication has to be free flow, authentic. And I want to be a East and West type of culture from our staff. But I would like to seek advice from you ladies is about risk-taking, allowing mistakes to happen many times and learn from it. Because sometimes in corporation, mistake is so fatal.
Yeah, I mean, I think mistakes are overrated. Nobody wants to make mistakes. I think we need, in my firm, I can only speak from my own experience, we need procedures, processes, checking to make sure that negligent errors don't occur. I mean, I think there's a difference between these negligent errors, as I mentioned earlier, and just getting it wrong, because sometimes we'll all just get it wrong. But if we haven't been negligent, then there's really nothing more we could have done. And I think that is probably what we need to encourage to instill in every organisation. Because if there's nothing else you really could have done or thought of, and you've all tried your hardest and used your best knowledge, then I think that's giving it your best shot.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it depends on potentially what are the consequences as well. I mean, there's often things that, you know, I think people are being way too slow or, you know, really going into sort of analysis paralysis when I'm sort of like, no one's going to die. You know, we are not heart surgeons. Just do something. So I think it's got to be a balance because, you know, things that are unacceptable consequences, if I'm speaking, you know, specifically from a Thomson Reuters perspective of if you know, bring down the network and then no one can trade or no one can use our services. And if that was because you didn't test your, you know, software patch that you were going to install. And obviously we used to get that a lot in Asia because they used to just, oh, let's just do it on a Sunday and it'll be fine because it's not going to affect America or Europe. And of course we come in on a Monday morning and nothing works. And so we've now stopped all of that. So I do think it depends on what you think the consequences will be, but you've got to kind of get that balance right between the do nothing, let's analyse, let's make sure that we've got every process, you know, every I dotted, every T crossed, depending on what it is you're talking about.
And I think that also, I think this is also about management and delegation. And, you know, it's very hard for me because I'm quite controlling in nature. So I've had to learn to allow my team to really give them the space to do the stuff. It's like what I said about the children, give them the space. Well, if I give them the space, why am I not giving my colleagues the space to try it? And we've had situations where we've watched someone do something and knowing that, or believing that it wasn't necessarily the best thing, but giving them the chance to do it, managing it on the way, mentoring it. And sometimes actually we were wrong, but I think that's something that I think for the millennium generation, we're going to have to handhold that, emotionally support that, but also give that space. And I know that's hard, but I think
that's a very good point, actually. And that's one of the things where I think being in a safe environment, so whether that's a training course or whatever, where you can sort of practice that. So I would say, I mean, I was just saying to Julie, I think we're probably all a bit sort of control freak at the end of the day. And so I went on a recent training course, and so multiple kind of levels within the company. So I was probably the more senior, and we had to split into two groups, and one group had to do a presentation to the board and the other group had to do the presentation to employees. So whatever this, you know, program that we were meant to be presenting on. And so several people who were not used to presenting in either scenario said, I want to do the presenting, so we're okay. I was in the group that was preparing the presentation for the board. The people who were presenting were quite junior, and they kept doing things like, audience participation. Okay, who's ready to hear what we've got to say? And I kept saying, I'd just like to say, you're presenting to the board, and, you know, the objectives have been given to you that you're to come in and tell, you know, Jim Smith, our CEO, how you're going to do 1, 2, 3 things. So no audience participation, I don't think, is the kind of right approach. And then they'd go and they'd refine what they do, and they'd come back and they'd still keep doing things like that. And I said again, I really think you've got to think about your audience. But to your point, I couldn't say, look, okay, this is not going to work, I'm going to do it. Whereas I probably would if it was really a live situation. That would have been my natural reaction, like, oh my God, this is going to reflect badly on all of us. But I was telling my boss this situation, so I was saying, I think it was very good because I said what I thought they should do, but I just stepped back and I just had to let them make that mistake. But it was interesting, his view was like, I said, it's like, you know, kids climb trees and they're going to fall out of them. He's like, but did you not think you should be there to catch them? And I'm like, you know, the same kind of thing. Well, I don't think they were going to break anything, so it was fine, you know. But it's very different scenarios. But to me, that was useful for me because I would have stepped in. Whereas I was trying to use different skills, learn different responses, because it was, if they were really in front of the board, it was terrifying.
Catch them. We may have time just for one more quick question.
I think as a mother of two boys, I think a lot about how to prepare them for their work environment, which, I mean, they're 4 and 7, so. But, you know, they will enter a workforce that is much more dominated by women than the older boys and even my husband, you know, have experienced. So I'm just curious what you, as senior women in the workforce, and Karen, of course, has, I'm sure, a lot of thoughts about this, but what is your advice to the young men you're already encountering? You know, are you finding that they are changing their way of dealing with women, and how do you kind of mentor them to succeed in this new world?
I mean, I thought it was interesting, you know, Julia talking about some of the men taking the flexible working options, because I do think some of these things, you know, it's like that, you know, we all get asked about work-life balance, but men don't. I think some of it, if you had programs like that actually men took advantage of it and not just women, would be useful. I mean, when I was in Australia, I did think there were some things where, so for example, when I first took over the sales team, when I went back there, I booked our meetings at 8 o'clock in the morning, the sales meetings at 8 o'clock in the morning, and it was 2 men who said, I can't do that because I've got to do the drop-off, which was quite good. So of course I could move it, whereas I think that's what people just need to speak out. So, but I don't know. I mean, this is terrible. I think this is, all of my direct reports are men, and which, you know, I think people say, oh, she talks the talk, she doesn't walk the walk. But I don't know whether they see sort of my style as different or anything that I do, but I probably am more flexible. If, you know, like a couple of them, their wives have just had babies, I would always say, well, you should stay home and look after, or, you know, if the baby's sick or whatever. I probably ask more of the questions about, well, who's doing stuff, why don't you go and help or whatever. But I think it's a very interesting point in terms of what we do. And the other one I think is language, which I don't know if anyone saw Jackson Katz, Dr. Jackson Katz at Sumay's Women's Gala. But I do think language is very interesting, how we phrase everything, pretty much from, you know, focusing on the female perspective, not perspective, but certainly around, you know, the way we sort of almost laying blame or whatever. And then there's also the gender stereotyping for men, which I think we need to really take a good hard look at.
I'm sorry, it's just in the interest of time, I wanted to make sure that we can close this off. And of course, the panelists can be around to answer your questions individually. I want to thank the panelists for their time. And I think if nothing else, we learned that commitment builds resilience, and mistakes are okay provided we catch them. Thank you very much.